You're listening to Rusty Mike Radio's Goldstein on Gelt with money maven Doug Goldstein.
We are talking to Warren Adelman, who is the president and chief operating officer of GoDaddy.com, which is the world's largest domain name register. They've got about 45 million domain names, probably more by now. Formerly, Warren had been an officer in the Israel Defense Forces and then spent several years in the Israeli Embassy in Washington, D.C. as the Chief of Public Affairs. Warren, I'd like to welcome you to the show.
Thanks for having me. In fact, we just crossed a new domain name milestone of 49 million domain names. So pretty happy to have crossed that threshold.
So what happens when you hit 50 million?
Well, we're discussing what kind of celebration we should have in recognition of that number and our customers. So we're working on it.
I guess whoever buys that 50 millionth is going to be the star of your show.
I think there'll probably be something of that nature.
Let me ask you the question that relates to my business. My real job is that I'm an investment advisor. I'm a financial planner here in Israel. And so in the past 20 years that I've been doing the business, my whole outlook on the world has changed because of the Internet. Everything I do today is absolutely different from how it was when I started on Wall Street 20 years ago. If you were to look ahead as an Internet, someone sort of on top of the Internet, what do you think the financial connection with the Internet is going to be in, let's say, another 5 or 10 or 20 years?
Well, it's what's that old saying? We usually overestimate 2 and underestimate 10 in terms of the pace of change and how things are affected. But I think it goes without saying that the eyeballs, the behavior continues to move more and more away from sort of the physical and into the Internet-enabled world, and in addition moves more and more away from sort of the traditional desktop environment to activity transpiring through your mobile devices or other connected non-desktop types of environment. So from a financial perspective, I think you've already seen many of the changes. Investment decisions are happening in real time from smartphones. A lot of the traditional kind of roles in the financial world have been disintermediated to some extent by this. So I think you probably see some acceleration as more of this is available on the mobile front. And then I think just given the pace of change that is being driven by social connectedness, that you may even see sort of the tie between the financial world and the social world, meaning how does your social network or your social connectivity impact decisions you make on a financial level, whether it's about investment decisions or budgeting decisions or other decisions you make of a financial nature. So I think it will probably, it'll be different than what we expect today, but I think we're definitely seeing the movement towards so much more happening on handheld devices.
So I guess the question that my mother would then want to ask a young man like you, which she would always ask me, is if everything is moving so much to the Internet, to handheld devices, is that going to be at the expense of the personal relationships that people might have been used to having had with their bankers and brokers?
Well, I guess the question is, will just be, how do you have that relationship with your banker and your broker? I think we've already seen, so much change in that front, right? I mean, I think it goes without saying that we don't spend as much time going in a bank to deposit or withdraw money. We do that through ATMs. Mm-hmm. And, I can remember when I was, in fact, a young man, having to run to the bank, growing up in Canada, having to run to the bank on a Friday afternoon before it closed at like 3 o'clock so that I would have money, for the weekend. And, thank goodness we now have ATMs and you're not sort of at the mercy of the closing of the bank, right? But I think the fact that so much information is at our fingertips today and so much can be done in the click of a button really means that the relationship we have traditionally with bankers and brokers and financial advisors is going to change, and they're going to have to find ways to interact with us through that new medium. Mm-hmm. And it may be that you have some form of network that really is your financial information network, right? And that your broker, your advisor participates in that way. You get alerts from them by your phone, et cetera, et cetera. So, I don't know exactly, but I'm sure it's going to continue to evolve and that the financial sector will do its best to evolve with it by enabling these tools and being participatory in the tools, because of course, they don't want to disappear from the game, nor am I suggesting that they should. Mm-hmm. People always need expert advice or the advice of others. It's a question, I think, of how it's delivered. Now, I'll say I'm in the web hosting, domain name, site security, basically small business presence environment. I'm not a financial expert, so okay. I'm prognosticating here on an area that's not my domain expertise.
Okay, my feeling is that just as you have your finger a little bit on the pulse of domain registration, we are talking to Warren Adelman, who is the president of GoDaddy.com, also a former Israeli Defense Forces officer. I cornered him with a question about the future of the Internet in the financial world, but specifically I think a big part of the work that GoDaddy does is registering domain for smaller companies. Would you have any practical advice for someone who's starting out, who wants to use the web as the core of his business?
Well, I guess, from our perspective, the domain name is really 21st century real estate, right? It's this piece of property, so to speak, that you can register and that transcends traditional world boundaries, right? The way we look at it is you have to go where the eyeballs are. And the eyeballs, whether it's for entertainment, for communications, for real estate, for finance, for sales, are increasingly moving to the Internet. So, our business is today about 9.5 million customers, and the majority of them are small businesses. And I think what they found is that, with us for about $140, $150 a year, you can have your domain name, your website, your marketing tools, your email, website security, all under one roof for very low cost. And, we kind of always joke, for the price of a small amount of Starbucks Frappuccinos, you've basically been able to enable your business online. I think the key is to be able to, find the right partners so that you can focus on what's really important for small business, which is sort of running the sales, running the marketing, running the people, dealing with your customers, and letting folks like GoDaddy sort of be the IT partner on the back end.
One of the areas that small companies often want to get, as you said, is good real estate. And the .com suffix at the end of a website always, at least in my mind, seems to feel like the serious websites, and all the other ones are a little less serious. Is that true, and do you think that's true going forward?
Well, listen, just because of, .com is still king, right? I think that goes without saying, simply because of that's where things in many ways started. And what's amazing is that on a daily basis, I still see great .com names registered, right? There are still so many, brand new .coms to be registered. But I really think it's not specific to that. We see great work being done with .orgs, where people are building sort of, organizations and nonprofits and social organizations around a .org, or people are using .me, which GoDaddy's involved in, to do, again, various social activities. And so I think it's more about how you operate your business, how you market your business, than the specific domain name. But, hey, .com, it's where it started, and it's still obviously the most successful top-level domain. Now, there's going to be a lot more coming. Recently, the body that sort of oversees the domain name system, ICANN, approved an eventual rollout of literally hundreds of new generic top-level domains. So at some point in 2013 and beyond, we'll probably see the proliferation of a lot of new domain names that people will be able to use. Now, we hope that we'll see a lot of entrepreneurship and innovation. Some will succeed. I'm sure some will fail. But the good news is that if you're starting a business, there's always a good name that's available.
I see. So before you came to GoDaddy years ago, you were in the IDF as an officer. As an officer there, what practical lessons did you bring from the Army to what you're doing today?
I think there's a couple of things that I guess probably three things. One is lead by example, right? When I was in basic training and then later when I was an officer, I always had people who were leading by example. If they were making you do something difficult, they were doing it as well. And I've always tried to carry that with me. So if our guys here are working late and down in the trenches, I try to be there, for support as well. And I think that leading by example is really something important that came through to me in the IDF. The other thing that I learned, and it actually transpired when I was in the IDF, was there was sort of a question at the time about the sort of sprawl within the IDF and the expansion of the ranks with maybe non-critical personnel. And the chief of staff at the time said, listen, it either shoots or helps shoot, or we're going to look to make sure it's not part of the IDF because they wanted to make sure the resources were going in the right direction. So we always try to think here about, hey, it either shoots or helps shoot. So that's why there's really only one admin in this whole company. This is not a company of administrative assistants or secretaries or anything like that. There's one in a company of 3,200 because we like either shoot or help shoot. And the other thing is it always helps me put things in perspective. You can have difficult days in any kind of business work environment, but, generally speaking, you're not talking about life and death. So when things look hard, you really have to step back and try to put it in perspective about how it compares to the really hard things that people are doing in the military, whether it's in the IDF or the U.S. Army, and when they're in harm's way. And you kind of have to have perspective on what you're doing at any given day in your workday.
That's a great view. We've been talking to Warren Adelman, who's the president and chief operating officer of GoDaddy.com. Warren, first of all, I want to thank you for your time. And just in the last few seconds, would you suggest a good way for people to keep track of what's going on in the company?
Well, I think the best thing is to look in our press section at GoDaddy.com, and those folks do a pretty good job of updating, on what's happening. The other thing is to follow us on Twitter at GoDaddy, which is our Twitter handle, and they produce information pretty regularly. And then I myself tweet at a social contract, and from time to time we'll release information or tidbits about what's transpiring at the company or how I'm looking at things that are transpiring in the technology industry.
That's great. Warren Adelman, thank you very much for your time.
Bavakasha.
This is Rusty Mike Radio.
Online now.
www.rustymikeradio.com